Morning.
Good morning, Professor. Hello. Welcome
Hello.
to Poland. Welcome to
Thank
Poland.
you very much. Thank you. Hola,
Thank you
Oscar.
very much for joining this session. This is a great privilege for us and for all society. We will start at 1 p.m. Okay, we have 5 minutes. And Oscar, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, you will start, yeah, of course, because you are organizers of this conference, yeah?
Yeah, okay. I will start at 1 p.m.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very well. Yeah. Okay. It was interesting, the previous session. The papers were very, very interesting. It was a problem of time because we didn't know exactly the time of the, but okay, I talked 20 minutes. I think Tatiana talked 25 minutes. And the other speakers more or less the same. It was interesting, the two views about the Spanish situation. Okay. My paper and the other paper was about the Spanish situation on COVID. The Constitutional Court rulings on COVID and the state of alarm, the state of exception, and these things. Okay.
Oscar, do you know that yesterday Polish session ended at 6 p.m.?
Okay.
It was a very hot discussion.
It was very interesting, the conference of the plenary session with the former ombudsman. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And well, yes, Felipe Gonzalez, yeah, we are very pleased with your presence and that you accept our invitation. And yes, and we have this issue that I mentioned in an email yesterday, that the other speaker will come at 1:40. We expect that the other speaker will come at 1:40. Then you can speak 30 minutes quietly, and then we will have your debate, your questions for the public. Maybe I ask you some questions from your speech, and yes, and that's the organization of the session.
Perfect.
I hope that will be some questions from Poland because you know about this crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border, yeah.
But you know that I asked for a visit to the governments of Poland and Belarus.
Really?
To go to the border. Unfortunately, I have not been yet granted the acceptation by both countries, but I hope I can do it at some point in January. Because I need an invitation from governments to conduct visits, and then I can submit a report to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations.
I see.
Okay, yeah, this will be a very interesting topic for today for your speech, and yes, it's as I mentioned in my welcoming speech. Now Poland, for different reasons, every country, but now Poland for different reasons is very interesting for human rights. Unfortunately,
you are right.
Yes, it's
Poland and Hungary, of course. However, I think that. On this scale, Poland is now for long far than Hungary even. Maybe not long, however, a little bit on the same position. Yeah. Some years ago, president of the ruling party said that we will have the Budapest in Warsaw. So we have it.
Yeah. Well, for this reason, this conference is so special and so important. And yes, and it's a great opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity and very, very interesting. Okay, I think 1 minute left. And
yes. we can start, yeah?
Okay.
We can start, yeah?
Okay. Now is the second plenary session of this international symposium, how the years 2020, 2021 have changed the world, organized by the Minkiewicz University of Poznan, Poland. In this plenary session, we have two key speakers. The first one is Felipe González Morales, United Nations Relator for Migrants and Refugees. And the second is Professor Alexander Sungurov, that is a professor at St. Petersburg School of Social Science and Area Studies. We are very pleased for having today with us Felipe González Morales as a special guest of these plenary sessions. And I am going to explain some of his main features of his curriculum. Felipe González Morales was appointed United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Immigrants and Refugees by the Human Rights Council in June 2017. Mr. González is a professor of international law at the Diego Portales University in Santiago de Chile, where he also directs the master's degree in international human rights. Between 2008 and 2015, he served as commissioner and rapporteur on migrants in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, on which he was president between 2010 and 2011. He's also professor in international human rights law in various postgraduate programs at Carlos III University of Madrid since 2003, as well as other universities in Spain. Since 2001, he has served as a professor at the American University Academy of Human Rights in Washington, D.C. He is founder and first director of the Diego Portales University Human Rights Center. He is also the founder and first director of the Latin American Network of Human Rights Legal Clinics. Felipe González, for us, it's a great honor that you accepted our invitation. And now is your turn.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this invitation from the organizer to address you in this International Day of Human Rights. I would like to start by saying that it's very much needed at this time around the world to emphasize the importance of the human rights of migrants in a context at which these rights are usually placed in a second position. Security-inspired migration policies prevail around the world, and it's key to revert this trend and ensure that human rights becomes the main focus of the migration policies. Of course, this should be done attending also to security considerations, but not at the expense of the human rights of migrants. I think that the topic that has been assigned to me is a very relevant one concerning the situation of migrants in the context of the pandemic. As you may imagine, over the last 2 years, I have had the opportunity to address this issue on a number of occasions at different fora. I submitted a report about the pandemic and the human rights of migrants to the United Nations General Assembly last October, and along with the Committee on Migrant Workers of the United Nations, my mandate has issued also a number of statements, including a joint guidance note to states to address adequately the pandemic with full consideration of the human rights of migrants, and another statement regarding the right to vaccination for migrants. As a general trend, I would say that the situation of migrants in the context of the pandemic has shown how difficult is the situation for them. I wouldn't say something completely new, really. And what we can observe is that many of the restrictions and limitations of the human rights of migrants in the current context of the pandemic are a more acute development of a prior situation or trends. And I would like to start in this regard with the issue of the access to public services, especially the issue of access to health services. Of course, as you may all be aware, migrants have endured during the pandemic a lot of restrictions, either by law or in practice, in their access to health services. But in truth, this is nothing new, really. We can see around the world, we saw around the world before the pandemic, many restrictions to the right to health for migrants in the different regions of the world, particularly in the case of irregular migrants. There are many countries at which irregular migrants only receive medical attention in urgent situations. Urgent situations that quite often do not derive from an accident or something completely new, but that may be the result of the lack of regular attention that leads in the end to an urgent situation. In other countries, there is a provision of health services for irregular migrants in situations other than urgent ones. But quite often, in a number of countries, in many countries, the health personnel share the information about the migrants with the enforcement agencies. What does this imply? This implies that migrants will be afraid of going to the hospitals because they could be detained and eventually deported. Over the last few weeks, for instance, we have been, from the reportership, we have been following the situation in the Dominican Republic, where Asian migrant women who are pregnant have been detained in hospitals and summarily deported. This is absolutely against international law. And this means that either the law enforcement agencies are watching and monitoring the situation in the hospitals, or that the hospital personnel share the information about the migrants with the enforcement agencies. So what is very much needed, indispensable, I would say, is that there are strong firewalls between the access to health services and the law enforcement agencies, so as migrants will not be afraid of going to health services to receive medical attention. And this, of course, is especially acute in the context of the pandemic. The same can be said related to other public services. For instance, on the issue of access to justice, it is indispensable that migrants can go and lodge a complaint, for instance, or can defend themselves for complaints presented against them. If this doesn't occur, this will lead to impunity. If they are afraid that their presence and the information about them when they're in an irregular status will be shared with law enforcement agencies, that will mean that they will not present any complaints. Another important topic that I'm sure is relevant for many countries is the issue of and I am aware that it's an issue also in Poland, is the use of exceptional measures. This has been done in the context of the pandemic by many countries, either by enacting states of emergencies or by adopting exceptional laws, exceptional legislation. Of course, a pandemic truly represents an exceptional situation, and exceptional measures are needed to confront it. But there are several points here. First is that over time, we have been for almost 2 years with the pandemic. Over time, states should have learned how to deal with the pandemic without exceptional measures or resorting to exceptional measures only in very specific circumstances. And second, even the measures adopted in the context of states of emergency should be narrowly tailored and ensure that are applied in a manner that is not in violation of the human rights of migrants. I think in this regard, it's very important the judicial control of the powers and measures and enforcement of the measures adopted by the executive. It's indispensable that an independent power, public power like the judiciary controls effectively the governments in this regard. And I think that the balance in this regard in the different regions of the world and the different countries of the world is very different. We have seen in some countries that the judiciary has effectively played that role in controlling the policies and measures adopted by states in the context of the pandemic, and other countries where they have not done so either for reluctance or for obstacles placed by the government or by the legislation. Also, as a general matter, in the context of the pandemic and the situation of the migrants, I would like to bring the attention about the trends of criminalization, extremization, xenophobia. These, again, are features that were present in many countries before the pandemic, but which have become more acute during the current context. In this regard, some states practice a very open xenophobic discourse in full violation, complete violation of international human rights standards. And other countries do so in a more subtle, but also very dangerous way. By more subtle, I mean that they are not directly attacking the migrants, but they are assimilating in a way migrants, especially irregular ones, with delinquency and with criminality. So we have seen this, for instance, in the massive practice of immigration detention in many countries, or by deportations conducted in ways that clearly stigmatize the migrants, or by expelling together migrants who have committed very grave crimes with others who have committed no crimes, but only were in an irregular status in the country of destination, and they are put in a whole bag, so to speak. So for the general public, the general population, it looks like all of them committed grave crimes, which is not the case very usually, and many other initiatives. At this time, I would say that in most democratic countries, irregular entry does not constitute a criminal behavior per se. However, we can see that many countries continue to practice immigration detention, now not based on criminal grounds, but on administrative grounds for having entered into a country without a permit, without a visa, or in some other irregular way. And this is also a manner to criminalize the migrants when it is practiced for cases which do not deserve such treatment. According to international law, restriction of the liberty, the deprivation of liberty of migrants should be a measure of last resort. It should also be restricted exclusively for adult migrants. What we see instead is that in many countries, adult immigration detention is practiced in a massive manner, and that immigration detention of children is also practiced. This is a very worrisome practice. I have been in a number of meetings regarding this matter, and particularly the issue of immigration detention of children, You may remember that this was an issue that was very much discussed around the world on occasion of the policies of the Trump administration. Of course, those policies brought immigration detention of children to an extreme. But immigration detention of children continue to be practiced in our countries, including countries of Europe. 77 countries around the world established the possibility of conducting immigration detention of children. Not the 77 are actually practicing it, but they can do so according to their own legislation. So this is a very complex practice, which is against international law, as has been repeatedly stated by many international human rights bodies. The issue of racism is also often linked with xenophobia and criminalization. I have seen in a number of visits to countries, even in some countries that restricted immigration, that at the same time they were receiving without much problem immigrants who were from the same ethnic origin. So there was a distinction, a discrimination in that regard, because the immigration policies depended to a significant extent to the race, to the ethnic origin of the person who was trying to migrate. Another issue which is of importance, it is of importance at all times, but it has become more acute in the context of the pandemic, is the issue of regularization. In the Western countries, we have not seen regularization processes often for a long time. Not in the first world countries, at least. For instance, I know some of the figures. For instance, in Spain, the last year when a broad regularization process took place was 2005. In the United States, this occurred in the late 1980s. And so is the case for most countries in the first world. In Latin America, which is receiving many migrants and asylum seekers these days, especially from Venezuela, some regularization processes have been conducted, but they are becoming less and less frequent. I would say that the case of Colombia is the most relevant one in this regard, that extended a regularization to almost 2 million of Venezuelans who are living in Colombia. During the pandemic, many countries have extended temporary permits for irregular migrants for the duration of the pandemic, or have extended permits that were about to end during the pandemic. This has been the case of many countries in Europe, such as, for instance, Portugal or Italy, and other countries as well. Those two were the first ones which did it. But we have not seen permanent regularizations processes. So all these are temporary measures that are very much needed. I recognize that they are very much needed in the context of the pandemic, but are not a definitive solution. First, you have to think about the issue of the end of the pandemic. I hope that they arrive soon. But when the pandemic ends, its social economic effects will be still in place. So it's very important to have the migrants allowed to stay beyond the end of the sanitary crisis, or to have a regularization in this regard. Otherwise, they're going to confront a very serious and difficult situation. The issue of deportations is also a key one. Again, an issue that was before the pandemic, and it is during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we saw at the beginning of it that there was a decrease in deportations. But over time, the figures became more or less the same than before. My office, my mandate has, over the last couple of years, has placed an emphasis on the issue of pushbacks, or devoluciones in caliente in Spanish, which are summary deportations of migrants without due consideration of the right to seek asylum or the right to access to justice. They are summarily deported without an adequate exam or no exam at all of their individual situations. These represent collective expulsions, which are against international law, and may represent a violation of the principle of non-refoulement, or the non-devolution principle, by which states are prevented from sending persons to a country where they may face a serious risk. This is an issue, you know, in the case, for instance, in the Mediterranean, where through different ways, persons have been sent back to Libya. Persons from different countries, basically from different African countries, are sent back to Libya, which is not a safe country, and where they may confront very serious risks for their lives or their well-being. I submitted a report on this matter to the Human Rights Council, the issue of pushbacks, and I mentioned many countries in Europe in this regard, many countries in Europe, which continue to practice it and do not resort to more humane ways to regulate migration. There is also the issue of those migrants in the context of the pandemic, which would like to return to their countries of origin. Especially during the first months of the pandemic, we saw that some countries, even invoking sanitary considerations, prevented their own nationals from coming back to their own countries. Of course, there is a very solid, well-established human rights to go back to your own country, which is from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, whose anniversary we celebrate today, on through all the most important international human rights treaties, and it's in the constitution of the democratic countries. But with the excuse of the sanitary situation, some prohibitions were put in place in this regard. Now, so there is, of course, the issue of the responsibility of the country of origin to accept back a person who has migrated. But there is also a responsibility on the part of the country of destination, or the country of transit, the country where the migrant actually is. And I mention this because many of the migrants who have had to go back to their countries of origin, the cause has been that they do not receive an adequate provision of health services, or some basic, they don't get satisfied some basic social needs in the country of destination in the context of the pandemic. So this shows a failure on the part of the public policies, especially social policies and sometimes health policies of the countries of destination. This, we could say that this forces the migrants to try to go back to their own countries. So there is the issue for the country of origin and for the country of destination as well. Finally, I would like to mention the issue of the role of the civil society, the issue of the monitoring of the human rights conditions of migrants, and so forth. The civil society plays a key role in the defense of the human rights of migrants. They have confronted many restrictions in the different regions of the world. This has been either through laws enacted at the local level or as de facto measures adopted by the governments, or by threats and menaces and sometimes killings of human rights defenders. This is a matter that we have repeatedly addressed at the rapporteurship, and so has done the special rapporteur on the human rights of the defenders. Because I would say that the situation of the defenders of the human rights of migrants is a particularly delicate one. And in the context of the pandemic, it has become even more acute and more difficult. You may have seen all those initiatives, including in the Mediterranean, but by other countries as well, by which the provision of humanitarian aid by human rights defenders or by civil society organization is criminalized. They are brought to the local tribunals for alleged cases of smuggling of migrants, when they are obtaining no money at all for this provision of humanitarian services, humanitarian help. And in this regard, I think that one of the key roles of the civil society, in addition to the provision of humanitarian aid and legal defense, when it is a civil society which provides that kind of service, is the issue of monitoring. The independent monitoring of the situation of the human rights of migrants is a key aspect that should be enhanced at all times and should be respected by states. And this is not always the case, not even in democratic regimes. And in the context of the pandemic, we have seen how many states invoke the sanitary crisis as an excuse, not well funded, I would say, to restrict this monitoring, this independent monitoring. For instance, especially I would say in the case of monitoring of the conditions of immigration detention centers. It is very important that the civil society is allowed to go into the immigration detention centers and report to the community about that situation. So I would like to end by making a call to the states in this regard, in this International Day of Human Rights, about the role of the civil society organizations and the obligation for states to respect the work of the civil society organizations, especially in the area of the protection of the human rights of migrants, who are usually in a very vulnerable situation, especially when they are with an irregular status. So I will stop here. I'm willing, of course, to have an exchange with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Morales. It has been a very interesting speech, a complete panorama of the situation of immigrants during COVID. Okay, then we have some minutes for a debate. I don't know if someone in the audience would like to ask some questions to Professor Morales.
If I may, Oscar.
Yeah, of course.
Because we were discussing about the case of Poland before the session in off broadcasting. However, may I ask Professor Morales about the short comment to the situation? I'm sorry for my point of view. However, situation on Polish-Belarusian border, because this is. In fact, a big challenge, it seems. From one hand, migrants, we can observe a kind of weaponization of migrants in this case. However, on the other hand, we have the statement and policy of Polish government, member of EU. So Could you share with us short comments on this situation? I will be grateful for it. Thank you very much.
Well, I have made public calls to the governments of Poland and Belarus not to politicize this issue and to fully respect the human rights of migrants and asylum seekers in the border. I understand this is a very complex situation, which is crossed by many factors. But the key point here is that political concerns should not override the protection of the human rights of migrants. In this respect, I have requested invitations from the governments of Poland and Belarus to conduct a visit to the countries and specifically to the border. And I hope that this visit may take place soon, hopefully in January. This should allow me to engage in a direct exchange with the authorities of both countries to interview the migrants themselves and report to the international community.
Thank you very much for your answer. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if there is more questions. I would like to ask something. Well, this is a bit academic, but I think it's interesting. Sometimes we say something that is wrong, that immigrants are a minority. And from the point of view of the international law, immigrants are not a minority. Maybe they are a vulnerable group. My first question, well, there are two questions. First, as a vulnerable group, do you think migrants with COVID has increased their inequality? Because one thing that is commonly said about COVID is that increased inequalities. This is particularly important for immigrants. And another question is, there are different levels. One is the legal status. This is very important for immigrants. Another level is social rights. But also there are other levels that usually are forgotten as cultural rights or political rights. Do you think COVID affects the migrant situation in these levels at the more or less the same, or affects especially the legal status and the social rights?
Thanks, Oscar. Well, I think that the first point that you did about the minorities and migrants is an important one, because, for instance, I would like to put an example with the Roma. The Roma are treated in many countries as they were migrants, and they are not, or some of them may be, but in Europe, for instance, in Spain, they are, I would say, almost all of them Spaniards. So they are not immigrants. And I think it's very important that to be enhanced and underlined, because otherwise in the public domain, there may be a prevailing opinion that, well, they are not nationals, so we don't need to recognize them the same rights that we have, and they are nationals belonging to a minority. So that's why we have in the system of special procedures at the United Nations two separate rapporteurships. There is a special rapporteur on minorities and a special rapporteur on migrants, in addition to many other rapporteurs, to make that clear distinction. And I think that it's a way to enhance the position of the minorities. Regarding the situation of the inequalities, well, of course, I mean, because the migrants, especially irregular ones, but not only irregular ones, are usually in a difficult economic position, in a context of an economic crisis, this becomes more acute. But in addition to that, I should say that we have observed in a number of countries, including democratic countries like Australia, for instance, a worrisome trend by which migrants sometimes are not included in some social programs during the pandemic. So I'm talking also about regular migrants here. So there are some programs that are only for nationals that in fact discriminate the migrants, both regular and irregular, by not having access to some social programs in a very much needed context. And then, of course, there are the implications on cultural and political rights. The issue of political rights of migrants is not a very settled one, I would say. The legislations of different countries, democratic countries, varies enormously in this regard. In some countries, this will depend on your nationality or will depend on bilateral agreements. While in ours, the political rights of migrants are more broadly recognized. And I have seen this also here in Chile. We have been in a number of elections throughout this year. We'll have the final ballot for presidential elections in 10 days. Migrants, even those who have the right to vote, have not done so on a significant basis, which may be lack of mobilization or that they're not feeling integrated into the country, so they do not engage in the political process, even though the political discussion refers to them as well as one of an important matter, I would say, because of Chile.
Yeah, precisely. I have two more questions. The first one is, okay, you have a very global approach, a very interesting approach for us, because you see the problems of a lot of a great amount of countries. And my question for you is, how you analyze and what measures could be applied about the question of anti-immigration speech for certain parties, especially extreme right parties, who uses an anti-immigration speech, who uses xenophobia as a political speech. Do you think there is a way to fight against this, or the way is the law, the way is education?
Yeah, well, I think it's especially a matter of creating public conscience in this regard, so as not having popular support for this kind of discourse and initiative. I don't think that the punishing will be the solution. It may even have it may enlarge the discourse when they will feel victimized, and they will persist in that xenophobic discourse. But of course, in certain situations, for instance, when this discourse may incite to violence, it should be punished. And I would say that the attitude of the governments is a key one here. Is a key one. I remember when I did a visit to Hungary, I had many meetings with governmental officials, and in some of the meetings, they were telling me that there is not a proved link between a certain type of discourse and a certain type of attitude of the general population. And of course, we are not doing studies of biology or physics here in causal relationships. But history clearly shows that a xenophobic discourse rapidly inflames and provokes a response from the general population, especially at the times of crisis. And that's why I think in the context of a sanitary crisis, which has an economic component as well, like the current one, it's especially risky to persist with this xenophobic discourse.
Okay, and my last question is about the pushbacks. From your point of view, how you interpreted the rulings that convalidate these pushbacks? I think in the European Court of Human Rights, there are some rulings convalidating these pushbacks in the Ceuta frontier in Spain. You have explained it very well from the point of view of the international law, that pushbacks are against international law. And what do you think about?
Well, the report that I mentioned that my mandate prepared about pushbacks was done later, was done after the European Court judgment on Spain, and I think it was important to put this in place in a broad global manner. That of course refers to a number of countries in Europe, not only Spain, but many countries really. I mentioned in the report, I don't know, 12 countries or so which practice pushbacks. I wouldn't say that strictly speaking, there is a difference in the legal standards in that judgment of the European Court and the report of the rapporteurship. What I think is that there is a way that the European Court, analyzes some facts in the case of the Moroccan Spanish border that has been very much disputed. I don't enter into that. Of course, it's not the role of a UN body to analyze decisions by regional bodies. But I think that's my point, because the main difference, because the court considered that with the system in place, for instance, the right to seek asylum in the border of Ceuta and Spain was granted, or the access to justice as well with some consular services. And that has been very much disputed by the civil society in Spain, from Spain. But there is a different legal standard, really. And I think that the fact that European Court decision revert a series of these prior decisions, including some on Spain on the same issue, reflects that there is a different appreciation of the facts. But I think that there are many cases in countries of Europe where pushbacks are being practiced in a regular manner, and unfortunately, they are considered by the governments as a legal practice.
Well, as a chair of the Research Committee 26 of the International Political Science Association, I would like to thank to Professor.
Oscar, I'm sorry, because Tatiana have some questions. Is it possible?
Well, okay, but he has raised a hand. Okay, yes, Tatiana.
Please switch on the microphone. Unmute, okay.
Do you hear me at the moment? Something happening strange with my my mic is just living its own life. Sorry. I just wanted to ask two questions, but in short, maybe in short. First one is connected with my also my professional interest connected with the gender issues of migration. And I would like to ask in your activity, in your expertise, do you use any kind of special measures which can be considered as a gender or focusing on kind of gender dimensions of migration? And the second one is also somehow relevant to the Professor Oscar Perez de la Fuente asking, but in a little bit other way. I'm quite interested also in a situation and your prognosis, probably your expertise, but how do you think deals will happen with all this border and recognizing of vaccination of different countries, etc., etc. I mean, with vaccine wars, etc. For people whom we can call neo-nomads. We are not minorities like in nomads Roma, but anyway, we're also quite dependent on openness or at least transparent of the borders. And all of us, of course, understand that in such kind of situation with which is unfortunately developing in this way, with transparency of the borders and right for movement, also for labor migrant, for high professional labor market, is bringing some kind of not just violations of right, but just kind of this professional activity performance. So it's two questions. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. In fact, this gives me the opportunity to refer to the issue of gender in migration. Which is a matter that has been present, is present in all my reports and activities. And during my tenure, I have submitted 2 reports on gender and migration, one to the Human Rights Council and another to the General Assembly. In the first one, I tried to summarize and systematize the situation of the human rights of migrant women in international law, and also referring to the legislation of many countries. And in the second, I presented a description of the situation in the different regions of the world, and submitted many proposals for states to improve their policies in this regard. And on the issue of the flows in the border and so forth, well, I think that the situation in the United Kingdom has clearly shown the limitations of policy of establishing big restrictions to immigration flows. Even in countries like the United States, which has for a long time had very restrictive policies towards migrants, in fact, the functioning of the economy also relies to some extent on the work of migrants, which are about 45 million persons in the United States, 11 or so of which are in an irregular situation. So I think that in a way, this has the situation in the United Kingdom has made clear that the contributions from migrants at the different levels, including the economic one, is a key one for many countries, especially in the current the functioning of the international economy.
Okay, well, now, as a chair of the Research Committee 26 of the Human Rights of the International Political Science Association, I would like to thank Professor Felipe González for his speech, for his explanations. It was a very, very nice time, and thank you very much. And
thank you very much to you.
And okay, now we have the second speaker of this plenary session. This second speaker is Alexander Sungurov, who is a professor at the St. Petersburg School of Social Science and Area of Studies in Russia. I am going to say some lines of the curriculum of Alexander Sungurov. His PhD of Political Science of 2007, Master of Jurisprudence of 1994, PhD in Biology in 1989. He has a degree in physics in 1974, professor, head of the Applied Social Science Department of National Research University, Higher School of Economics in St. Petersburg, president of the Regional Center of Humanities and Political Science Strategy, expert of human rights of the Council of Europe, vice president of the Russian Association for Political Science, member of the Russian President Council of Support of Civil Society Institutions, Development of Human Rights, Chairman Public Expert Council of Civil Education and Human Rights Education for the Standing Committee for Education and Science at the State of Duma of the Russian Federation, between other distinctions. And starting from 1998, he was the head of strategy, Center of Program for Support of Institute of Commissioners of Human Rights in Russia regions. He is author of the book, Ombudsman's Institute, Evolution of Traditions and Contemporary Practice, and co-editor of the book, Human Rights and Challenges of the 21st Century, member of the Research Committee IPSA from 2006, member of the Research Committee 26 board from 2006 and 2014, and from 2016, and chair of the research committee from 2018 and 2021. And well, for me, it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to present Alexander Sungurov in a session. And Alexander, it's your turn.
Thank you very much, Oscar. I am very glad to be with you again because conference in Ekaterinburg is prolonged. But I am now with you. Of course, sorry that I couldn't be before. That I try to introduce my presentations in demonstration of this ecran. It must be okay. Yes, it's okay. Yes, demonstration is okay. And my speech would be for these topics: New World Order after pandemic. Can new political thinking be reinvented? We will say about such events. Content of presentation: Pandemic COVID as analog of Chernobyl disaster. Concept of new thinking in perestroika time. Predecessor of the new thinking concept and about responsibility of IPSA and our RC26. Pandemic COVID as an analog of Chernobyl accident. The COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences have undoubtedly will continue to make significant change in new world order. In the global world, we need a new conference to develop new rules of the game because the impact of pandemic is comparable with the World War. And at this conference, it is necessary to develop tool-led institute of global cooperation, which can be quickly adopted and implemented, taking in account of maximization of the common good rather than striving to hurt the neighbor. It is from some Forbes journals, but it's word very necessary to my mind, because conference after the World War, if we compare, created the United Nations, the chair of which SEDEF is respect for universal human rights. Therefore, our attention will be paid to the necessary and highly desirable reform of the United Nations also to make this organization correspondent to the reality of today's works. To my mind, is very necessary. However, as a radiobiologist in my initial academic career, I want to start with the effect of another disaster. There is Chernobyl, including its effect on the political life of my home, which took form which took form for new political thinking as the foreign policy courses of USSR in the last years of its existence, in time of Gorbachev. Special attention will be paid to the new political thinking itself, as well as to its predecessor, and approach close to it, hoping to contribute to development of new, as of 2021, also thinking to the renewed political order. Chernobyl accident. Comparing the COVID-19 pandemic with the Chernobyl disaster, you can see the results of catastrophe in Chernobyl nuclear factory as it occurred in USSR in April 1996. Let us leave the main caused nature of Chernobyl disaster itself and the involvement of the personnel who turned off all protective system in order to have time to conduct the experiment for the My Day out of the picture. Yes, we are out of the picture in this problem about the maybe reason of a pandemic from some experiments. It's outside of our discussions. But let's compare Chernobyl disaster with the COVID-19 pandemic by the criterion of informing residents of their own country and those of other countries about the occurrence of the events. It's known that after the explosion of Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there was a delay in informing both Soviet citizens and the world community about the disaster. In the case of outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, China is known to have withheld information of the number of the cases in Wuhan, which led to the spread of an epidemic around the globe via flights from China. It seems that in USSR, it was a shock of the Chernobyl catastrophe that became an important milestone to the development of the process of perestroika and understanding by Mikhail Gorbachev that in place of secrecy and autocracy, openness and publicity must be needed. The idea of the need for a new thinking of the world politics was also a logic step forward. Yes, concept of shortly about new thinking in perestroika time. It's connected with Mikhail Gorbachev. The concept of the new political thinking implied that with respect of autonomy and observing of principle of non-interference to each other affairs, states and people recognize a common responsibility for survival of all mankind. The new thinking proposed a project for a structure of the world in accordance with the universal human values. The main of them are those related to human life, freedom, and security for everyone. Mikhail Gorbachev writes, we are all passengers on the same ship, the Earth, and it cannot be allowed to wreck. This will be no second nor arc. We don't like any aspect of American politics and lifestyle, as right Gorbachev in this time, but we recognize the rights of people of the United States, like everyone else, to live by their own rules and laws and by their own custom of tests. Time is running out and we couldn't lose it. We have to act. The situation does not allow us to wait for ideal moment. A constructive and extensive dialogue is necessary today. Unfortunately, in this time, this concept was not supported. However, because they more discussing about the victory in the Second World War in many European countries. However, today discussing the state of the world system after, or perhaps in the midst of coronavirus pandemic, we can assume that the concept of new thinking could become the basis of the new vision of the world system, which could lead to new, by the end of second decade of the century, more effective way of global governance, global management, and such management that would can take predecessor of new thinking concept. Between predecessor, Immanuel Kant and Woodrow Wilson, the fundamental possibility of the representative of the different states to agree on the basis of some common values underlies the liberal approach in the theory of international relationship, treaties towards external peace of Immanuel Kant. There was also prerequisite for Woodrow Wilson's proposal of the principle of the League of Nations. But proposal of Woodrow Wilson was not supported by elite of its own country. The United States not joined to the League of Nations. More than 6 years ago, later, Mikhail Gorbachev and his call for collective realization idea that we are all in one board and another planets are not available to us has not been heard by the elites of other countries. The US leadership rejected this proposal as a propaganda tool, as Gorbachev retreated in all directions. That is still operating with the logic of Second World War, and NATO pledged to be near to the boundary of Russia. Plenary review of Russian scientists. We are going about predecessor next. Vladimir Vernadsky. His idea of noosphere as a phase of biosphere development. Humanity, taken as a whole, becomes a powerful geological forces. And before his thought and works becomes the questions of biosphere reconstruction in the interest of rethinking mankind as a single whole. The new state of biosphere, which we are approaching without tracing it, it is a noosphere, writes Vernadsky in this time. In the contemporary understanding of the noosphere, a new evolutionary state of the biosphere in which reasonable human activity becomes a decisive factor of its development. The analysis of development of scientific thought and role of science in evolution of biosphere has led him to a provision of special responsibility of scientists for the process of this noosphere genesis. Whole life of Vernadsky was a realization of the concept concerning responsibility of scientists. He actively participated in so-called Zemstvo movement, was one of the founders of Constitutional Democrats Party, and the permanent member of its Central Committee, and in summer of 1970 was a comrade of Tavarish Minister of Education of the government of Kerensky. Other guy, Nikolai Rerich, was other Russians, and after his immigration, international figure of the world culture, whose proposal to sign the World Culture Pact, Rerich Pact, with impliance of preservation of the cultural property as a planetary goal, was supported by US President Franklin Roosevelt. As a result, the first international treaty of the protection of artistic and scientific institutions and historical monuments in history was signed in 1935. Other variants, Club of Roma, established in 1968, as association of scientists, politicians, and business people capable of generating seriously scientifically grounded prediction to scientists, represent not only a stable artistic community, but also an extremely interesting example of Paul Sabatier effective advocacy coalitions, working in the format of unique think tank and the coalition not in the national but in the global state. You can see this some report of a Roma Club and last report and vice versa. The report of Club of Rome have a huge influence on for global attention to a global ecology problem. Club of Rome, which is like another club, had a rather limited membership, was soon supported by UNESCO and a much more open, scientific and educated association. As consequences, the World Future Studies Federation, which was established, which involved both academical forecasters, scientists in other specialty, and civil activists concerned about the problem of the Club of Rome. I participate with this international society some years. It was very interesting example. And next step, Andrei Sakharov. Now it's the year of his 100th century. Where is Andrei Sakharov was born. Soviet academician, father of the H-bomb, and human rights activist. Was maybe the solely Soviet scientist who looked to the international relationship from the liberal point of view. He supported the concept of convergence of the West and East country. In accordance with Vernadsky's conception of scientist responsibility, for world politics he proposed in 1971 to establish under the auspices of United Nations the International Advisory Committee of experts on legal, social, environment, and discernment problem for the reliable and impartial individuals, with the rights to receive reasonable response to the request and recommendation from all governments. The status of this board, as well as procedure governing its composition, should ensure maximum independence from the national interests of individual states and group of states. It's all this history of about producer and maybe persons who are roots of the idea of the new thinking and about the global responsibility for our planet, and especially it's necessary in this global cooperation in time of pandemic situation. For example, the problem of registration of all vaccine. You know that Russian Sputnik don't register it because it's to my mind it's not so problem of mostly of some maybe concurrence, but other. But we must also understand, to the final of my presentations, I say maybe some more words about some roots of this idea of the new thinking, but it's necessary, not only Russia from international approach, but some global thinking as Vernadsky's maybe. Specificity of the some Russian scientists in the end of 19th and beginning of the end of 18th, 19th, beginning of 20th century. But of course it was stopped by the Soviet regime, but Sakharov living in the Soviet regime, and his proposal was very also necessary and interesting. And from other sides, it's really feature of our community of the human rights researchers, because he was one of the most strong figure in the Russian human rights movement in Soviet time, and also beginning of the new era in time of he was deputy of the understanding, you know. But also, my final part of my presentations, it's about responsibility, as I say, of our IPSA in the whole, and about our concrete RC26, because we are not only researchers in these fields, as in other fields, but it's some yes, maybe we are more understanding this normative approach to the future of our civilizations, as part of the other committee is IPSA. And also we must remember that our association IPSA was established in 1949 in Paris with the strong support of UNESCO as Organization of United Nations. I mentioned before that UNESCO supported in that time also Organization of World Future Studies Federation, more concretely about prognostics, approach more wider organizations that Roma Club, it was in 50s. But before, IPSA helped to establish World Future, UNESCO helped to establish our international political science relations. As Maurice Duverger, and about the founding conference of IPSA, which was in the December 12, 1949, with recalling the sophists who approaches Socrates with the argument that motions that did not exist, to which the philosopher replied by merely arising and starting to walk. So UNESCO has transformed speculative and theoretical arguments about the necessity of IPSA as to existence of political science into actions for carrying the present conference in which it was established. That history of our political science association connected with United Nations and its structure as UNESCO. As a result of this very necessary way of world governance, of course, it was not all of this was realized in the time. It was not only global governance, but it was the solely international organization. Now it's necessary to reform. And to my mind, today, we must support efforts for improving the UNESCO and United Nations activity. For such objective is, for example, to creation of real political thinking, real global thinking with respect of human rights and responsibility to such challenges as pandemic COVID-19 or climate change. And it's very strange. Also, when I analyzed my report and the paper about this, which is fed for my speeches, it is a huge problem that in many, for example, in Russia, majority of scientists for international relations say that support official point of view, that it's necessary to reform, but of course, Security Council must be the same, or with a reason for this veto. But also is absolutely strange. It's absolutely relic of the Second World War, now more than 70 years ago. Why is there solely reasons why United Nations not reform the Council of Defense? Because Security Council, because it was no one variant, one common variant. It's maybe 2 or 3 variants how to combine new Security Council with who must be member, and all these competitions. And for this reason, it's not reforming, but of course is a very big problem for the common decisions or new common decision for global governance. And to my mind, of course, IPSA as from and our committee responsibility for human rights, that IPSA at all as a real community of scientists and political science, international community. And from other sides, we understand our responsibilities that, to my mind, is necessary to thinking about this and maybe start some discussions about new global governance, and maybe together with other associations about new global governance. And to my mind, it must be very near idea with a new political thinking of Mikhail Gorbachev. And maybe today, it would be more serious relationship to this idea of more morality. Of course, it's not his own idea. It was on the health of Woodrow Wilson and Vernadsky and many other Roman club, but now it's necessary to thinking about this. Not only thinking, but also maybe to prepare some initiative. Every chance, every actions, it's results from that somebody start of this. Thank you for your attention, and maybe I hope it would be very good sunset, but not the end of our civilization, I hope. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, thank you. I hope so. That is not the end of our civilization. Very interesting speech. I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions for Alexander. If they want to comment something about this speech. I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, the idea is that, okay, how the world has changed, the 2020 and 2021. Okay, the main topic is the pandemic and how the countries deal with the pandemic, and we have had the situation that for one side we have the natural scientists, the doctors, the biologists, the epidemiologists that say some certain scientific truth about the virus, about the pandemic. For the other side, we have the politicians that have to take the decisions, the public officials who have to take the decisions. And in the middle, we have the political scientists that we don't have the truth of the biologists and the doctors, and we have to use some time of truth. But I think we are in the middle between the politicians and the doctors and the biology and the science.
Yes.
What is the responsibility of the political scientist in this context?
No, you understand this question is very good. The goal of the mission of my presentations, it's about our responsibility. We are responsible for this. We must stand. My idea is that we must understand our responsibility, and if it would be understanding, to thinking about some concrete actions how to it realized. But also it's also necessary to be more communication between political scientists and other representatives of science. For example, I am trying to development so in politology of the law, the new directions which is in the boundary between law and political science. It's many big questions. Human rights, to mine, is one of the points. To analyze, but how to do this? Not by decision. We have no possibility to issue some decrees, but we can to organize communications with other fields of scientists together by Habermas to realize real public opinion. And now one of the good results of the bad situation with the pandemic is that some communication through Zoom is absolutely national for us. It's every day we have some lectures through Zoom. For this reason, we can to communicate about the boundary. And by Vernadsky, it's near to the real noosphere, but it's not automatic. It's only by our actions, to my mind. And I think that not only with lawyers, but with our science of social science, but also with natural science, because problems of ecology is now start to be real big problems. But in the my main message that pandemic, it's only signal for new time where is necessary to have real effective global governance system. How it's be true, how it will be created, it's many problems, right? How it would be controlled by civil society, yes? It's also other questions. How our IPSA control working with UNESCO, because my idea is about responsibility, and it's against line to live in this tower from the elephant head. You understand, from Slonovy Kosti, but no, it couldn't. It's impossible because the problem is more higher. It must be in the auditorium also me that is I am sitting that no moving and the switch is closed. But not closed. I must say that it's okay. We must thinking about this. To my mind, it's if we. I don't say about this last year because last year, 2 years, it was necessary to organize our RC26 from the near to zero. Sometimes now it is not zero. It is real company. It is have a real partners and groups in many countries. That to my mind we can do together with analysis of our research activity and other thinking about this. Who is not me, is not we, have this idea of the responsibility. Of course, it's not so simple. It's big problems because many problems communicate, but we must thinking about our children and sons of our daughter of our children. If we wanted to thinking not only about this global crisis, but how to realize. Maybe political scientists, we are who understand from other side, one side, what it is the governance, what it is public affair, from point of view public policy, we can say, how it's work for governance, good governance in this, as we say. And from other sides, we are very connected with some normative discipline of political philosophy. That what it is good governance, it's governance with respectfully to human rights, one of them. For this reason, I think that we maybe, I hope that we can be started. Of course, it's not so simple. We must discuss my idea. Maybe it was adopted, maybe not. It was only my proposal. But I think that for me, it's very some analogies with this accident to the Chernobyl accident, because I am research Chernobyl accident. I am in my first life. I used to know I am biologist, physics, who works in the field of action of X radiation to the human body and to the human cells. And for this reason, I am very near to me and what is the real start for real changing of situation in Soviet Union after the understanding of dangers of such positions. To my mind, we have some gongs on some calls for the necessity to understand that necessary to be active as real expert responsibility. And plus idea of Vernadsky that we are responsible for transitions of biosphere to noosphere. It is not automatic process. It may be ended for the Second World War, for example, for atomic catastrophe, maybe other catastrophe, and how going from this, going not through this or about this, it's a big question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone in the audience would like to ask some questions to Alexander Sungurov?
No, I hope that in future maybe we'll discuss it through internet, because I understand that it maybe not everybody expect such idea, but we must to think in future.
Okay, okay. Well, I
Thank
think
you very much.
we can thank Alexander Sungurov for this interesting speech about the responsibility with the catastrophes, with the different catastrophes. And thank you very much for your speech and for all your tasks in RC26. And okay, this is the end of the second plenary session of the International Symposium, How the Years 2020-2021 Have Changed the World. And I think there is another session, I think
We will start at 3 p.m. Yeah,
at 3 p.m. Okay, very well. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you all the.
Thank you.
And
I will go to
thank,
conference in Yeltsin
Sarah.
Center again. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.